It was late September when I reconnected with my old friend, Daniel. We'd known each other since high school but hadn't spoken much after college. He reached out suddenly, asking if I wanted to meet up for coffee. At first, I was surprised. He wasn't the type to initiate things. Still, I agreed. We met at a quiet little cafe downtown, the kind of place where the smell of fresh coffee filled the air and soft music played in the background. When I walked in and saw him at the corner table, something immediately felt off. Daniel looked thinner than I remembered. His skin was pale, almost gray under the cafe lights, and his eyes had this tired, restless look. When he smiled, it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "Hey," he replied, his voice softer than I remembered. At first, the conversation was normal. Work, family, the usual catch-up talk, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was distracted. His gaze kept drifting to the window, like he was expecting someone. Once or twice, he even leaned forward slightly, like he was listening for something outside. "Everything okay?" I asked at one point. He blinked, as if snapping back. Yeah, I'm fine." But he wasn't fine. When the waitress brought our coffee, Daniel's hands trembled as he reached for his cup. Not just a small shake from being tired. His whole hand was unsteady, almost like he was cold. Yet the cafe was warm. I tried to lighten the mood, joked about how life was turning us old already, but he didn't laugh. Instead, he leaned in closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "Have you ever felt like someone's watching you all the time?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. I half smiled, waiting for him to laugh, but he didn't. His expression was dead serious. "Not really," I said. "Why? You feeling paranoid or something?" Daniel's eyes flicked to the window again. He swallowed hard before answering. "It's not paranoia, if it's real." The rest of our conversation was scattered. He avoided details, only saying he hadn't been sleeping much. He mentioned strange noises in his apartment, how things weren't where he left them, how he sometimes woke up in the night certain that someone had just been standing over his bed. I wanted to tell him it was probably stress, or maybe he just needed to see a doctor. But the way he said it, the way his voice shook, made my stomach knot. When we finally left the cafe, Daniel lingered by his car. He kept glancing around the parking lot, scanning the shadows as though someone might step out. Before getting in, he leaned over to me and whispered, almost pleading, "Don't tell anyone yet. Just keep an eye on me, okay? You'll see what I mean soon." Then he drove off, leaving me standing there with a chill creeping down my spine, even though the night air was warm. At that time, I didn't realize it was just the beginning. His strange behavior hadn't even begun to show its true depth. 2 nights after our meeting, I was sitting at home, half watching TV when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Daniel. "Are you awake?" The time read 12:43 a.m. I frowned. Daniel had never been the type to stay up late, at least not back in the day. I typed back a simple, "Yeah, what's up?" His reply came fast. "Can I come over?" "I don't feel safe." I hesitated. Something about those words made my chest tighten. Still, I couldn't just ignore him. I gave him my address, and about 20 minutes later, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, Daniel was standing there, hood pulled over his head, his eyes darting up and down the street like he was checking for someone. He slipped inside quickly, shutting the door behind him almost too forcefully. "Did anyone follow me here?" he whispered. I blinked. "Follow you?" "Daniel, what's going on?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he paced the living room, pulling the curtains tighter. His movements were sharp, almost frantic, like every sound outside made him flinch. Finally, he sank onto the couch, rubbing his hands together. "I know how this looks. I sound crazy, right?" I sat down across from him. "You don't sound crazy. But you need to tell me what's going on." He leaned forward, eyes wide, voice trembling. "It's not just noises anymore. I keep seeing someone in my apartment, not face to face, but when I wake up at night, I'll find things moved. My closet door wide open when I swear I shut it. My kitchen chair pulled away from the table like someone was sitting there. And last night," he trailed off, swallowing hard. I waited. "Last night, I woke up and my bedroom window was unlocked. I never leave it unlocked. I'm telling you, someone's coming inside." The room fell quiet. I could hear the hum of my refrigerator in the kitchen, the tick of the clock on the wall. I wanted to tell him it was all in his head, but something in his eyes stopped me. He wasn't lying. He was terrified. "Why didn't you call the police?" I finally asked. "I did," he said. "They came, looked around, said there was no forced entry. They acted like I was imagining it, but I'm not. I'm not." His hands were shaking again. He reached into his pocket and pulled something out, a small keychain flashlight. He set it on my coffee table, and I noticed the casing was cracked, like it had been dropped hard. "I dropped this last night when I heard footsteps in my hallway," he said, his voice lowered to a whisper. "I didn't imagine those footsteps. I heard them. Clear as day, I felt a chill creep up my neck." Daniel was always the logical one back in school, the guy who would laugh at ghost stories, the one who said horror movies were just cheap tricks. To see him like this, trembling and pale, shook me more than his words. We stayed up for an hour, him talking in circles, me trying to calm him down. Around 2 a.m., he finally leaned back, exhausted. "I just needed to be around someone. I can't stay in that apartment alone tonight," I told him. He could crash on the couch. He seemed relieved, though he kept glancing toward the windows, like he expected someone to press their face against the glass. At some point, I drifted off to sleep in my room. When I woke up in the early morning light, I went to check on him. The couch was empty. For a split second, I thought maybe he'd gone home. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On my front door, faint but clear, were 3 long scratches. They weren't there the night before. And Daniel? His shoes were still by the couch, his jacket draped over the armrest, his phone on the coffee table. He hadn't just stepped out. He had left in a hurry. The only thing missing from the room was Daniel himself. I didn't sleep the rest of that morning. I sat in the living room, staring at Daniel's jacket, his phone, the scratches on my front door. My chest felt tight, like something heavy was pressing against it. I kept replaying the night in my head. The way he whispered, the way his eyes darted around like he was being hunted. And then I thought about those scratches. They weren't random. They were deep, deliberate. 3 clean marks carved into the wood. By 7 a.m., I was pacing my kitchen, debating whether to call the police. Finally, I picked up Daniel's phone. No lock screen, just a swipe to open. I hesitated for a second, then slid my thumb across. His recent texts stopped cold at the one he'd sent me. "Can I come over? I don't feel safe." Nothing after that. His call log showed 2 missed calls from an unknown number around 11:30 p.m., about an hour before he texted me. No voicemail, just missed calls. My stomach sank. I dialed his number from my own phone, half expecting his jacket pocket to buzz, but nothing happened. His phone was right in front of me, silent. By noon, I finally caved and drove to his apartment. It was on the edge of town, a low-rise brick building with peeling paint and a parking lot full of cracks. I'd been there once years ago, when he first moved in. His car was still in the lot. A layer of dew clung to the windshield, untouched since last night. I climbed the narrow stairwell to his unit and knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. The hallway was silent, the kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of every sound you make. I tried the doorknob. To my surprise, it turned easily. The door creaked open. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Not rotten, not dirty, just stale, like a room sealed up too long. I stepped inside. His living room was dim, curtains drawn tight. Empty takeout containers sat on the coffee table, a half-full water glass, untouched. On the wall above the TV, I noticed faint smudges, as if someone had pressed their hands there, dragging downward. "Daniel?" I called softly. No response. I walked further in, my shoes crunching faintly against the carpet. Everything felt wrong, like I was trespassing in a place I shouldn't be. His bedroom door was cracked open. I pushed it gently. The room was a mess. Sheets tangled, pillows on the floor. His closet door was wide open, just like he'd said. Inside, I saw clothes shoved to the sides, hangers swinging slightly as if disturbed recently, and then I noticed the window, unlocked, just like he'd told me. I froze. The air felt colder by that window, a faint draft slipping through. I leaned closer, scanning the sill, and my heart skipped. Scratches, small but noticeable, like fingernails or a tool dragging across the wood. I backed away, suddenly aware of how quiet it was. Too quiet. The kind of quiet where you know you're not alone, even if you can't hear anyone else. I turned back to leave when something caught my eye on his nightstand, a notebook. The cover was bent, corners worn. I picked it up and flipped it open. The first few pages were harmless. Random notes, lists. But then the writing changed, messy, frantic. The sentences barely made sense. He's here again. I heard him breathing in the hallway. Don't look out the window at night. They said not to tell, but I can't stay quiet anymore. Page after page, the words became less coherent. Whole lines were scribbled out so hard the paper nearly tore. But one phrase repeated over and over, in shaky handwriting. He's watching me. The last entry stopped me cold. It read, "If I disappear, don't believe it was my choice." I slammed the notebook shut, my hands shaking. I wanted to run, but before I could, I heard it. A sound from the hallway. Slow, deliberate footsteps. They weren't mine. I froze, clutching the notebook against my chest. The steps grew closer, steady, echoing faintly through the silence. Whoever it was stopped right outside the apartment door. The knob rattled once, then everything went quiet again. I stood there for what felt like forever, barely breathing, waiting for the door to swing open. But it didn't. After a few long minutes, I gathered the courage to move. I slipped out through the back stairwell and didn't stop walking until I was back in my car, hands trembling as I gripped the wheel. I didn't know where Daniel was. I didn't know what I had just walked into. But I knew one thing for sure. Whatever was happening to him wasn't in his head. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the notebook. The messy handwriting, the frantic words, the last entry that felt like a warning meant for me. I laid it out on my kitchen table, flipping through page after page. Most of it was paranoia on paper, shadows in the hallway, whispers through the walls, knocks on the window. But some entries stood out. One page in particular had a date circled over and over again, September 10th. Next to it, Daniel had written, "First time he came inside." I checked my phone. That was about 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks of him living with this, writing it down, and no one believing him. I felt sick. I kept staring at his phone, still sitting on my counter from when he left it behind. Part of me didn't want to dig into it further, but another part knew I had to. If Daniel really was in trouble, this was the only way I might figure it out. I scrolled through his gallery. Most of the photos were normal. Work documents, random pictures of the beach, a few shots of his cat he used to have. Then I found a folder tucked at the bottom called Nights. There were videos inside, dozens of them. Each file was only a few seconds long. My chest tightened as I tapped the first one. It was dark, grainy footage of his bedroom. The camera was angled toward the window. For the first 10 seconds, nothing happened. Just silence. Then faintly, the sound of tapping. A soft, rhythmic tap against the glass. Daniel whispered, "Do you hear that?" But the video ended before anything else happened. I opened another. This one was shakier, filmed from his bed. The closet door was slightly ajar. For a few seconds, nothing. Then, movement. The door creaked open just a little wider, though no one was there. Daniel's breathing quickened on the recording. "Stop it," he whispered. Video ended. By the time I reached the 5th or 6th clip, my stomach was knotted so tight I could barely breathe. But then I tapped on one that was longer than the rest, nearly a full minute. The video opened on darkness. The camera was tilted, sitting on a table or nightstand. Daniel must have set it down before filming. At first, nothing, just silence. Then, about 20 seconds in, something shifted in the background. The closet. The door moved again, slower this time, until it opened wide. The camera didn't move, but I could hear Daniel whispering, "Who's there?" At the 30-second mark, a shape moved across the frame. I can barely describe it. Tall, thin, almost blending into the shadows. It stepped halfway into view, but the angle kept its face hidden. For a moment, it just stood there, head tilted unnaturally to the side, like it was listening. Then, so faint I almost didn't catch it, a voice rasped through the speakers. "You can't hide." The video cut off. I slammed the phone down on the table, my skin crawling, every hair on my arm standing on end. I wasn't imagining it. Daniel had proof. Something had been inside his apartment. Something real. I grabbed the phone again, searching through the files for anything more recent. The last video was dated the night before he came to my place. I tapped it. The screen lit up with the familiar grainy image of his bedroom. This time, the window was the focus. It was shut. Daniel's voice whispered, "Stay away from me. Please just stay away for a few seconds. Nothing." Then, out of nowhere, the sound of scratching. Long, slow drags against the glass. Daniel whispered again, more desperate this time. "Why me?" And then, clearer than anything else I'd heard yet, the same low voice responded, "Because you see me." The video ended abruptly. I sat there frozen, my pulse thundering in my ears. That was the last file. No recordings after that. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every creak of my apartment, every passing car outside made me jump. I kept glancing at the windows, half expecting to see something tall and thin standing there, tilting its head just like in the video. And the thought that gnawed at me most wasn't just about Daniel. It was this. If whatever was tormenting him had followed him to my place that night, then maybe I was the one being watched now. The next 24 hours were some of the longest of my life. I couldn't shake the videos, that voice, the words, "Because you see me." By evening, I hadn't heard from Daniel. No texts, no calls, nothing. His phone, still with me, remained silent. I thought about going back to his apartment, but the memory of those footsteps in the hallway froze me. Instead, I decided to call the police. I told them my friend was missing, that he'd left his belongings at my place and never came back. They promised to file a report, but when I mentioned the scratches on my door and the videos on his phone, their tone changed. They asked if maybe Daniel had mental health issues, if he was unstable. I could tell they didn't believe me. That night, I locked every door and window, drew the blinds tight, and left a light on in every room. Still, the atmosphere in my apartment felt wrong, like the air itself was heavier. By midnight, I was sitting on the couch, notebook in one hand, Daniel's phone in the other. I kept flipping through the pages, hoping to find something I'd missed, some clue to where he might have gone. That's when I noticed a line scribbled at the very bottom of one of the last pages. "If he knows you see him too, he'll come for you next." My stomach dropped. Almost immediately, there was a sound, a knock. Not loud, just 3 slow taps on my window. I froze. My apartment was on the second floor. No balcony, no ledge, just a sheer drop to the pavement below. The knock came again. Louder this time. My chest tightened. I didn't want to look, but my eyes betrayed me, drifting toward the blinds. For a second, I thought I saw a shadow. Tall, stretched unnaturally against the slats. I stumbled back, heart hammering. My phone was in my hand before I realized it. I dialed 911 with shaking fingers, whispering to the dispatcher that someone was outside my window. But before I could finish, something else happened. The sound of my front door handle twisting, slowly, deliberately, back and forth. I gripped the phone tighter. "Someone's trying to get in," I whispered. The dispatcher asked me to stay calm, that help was on the way, but her voice felt far away. All I could hear was the handle rattling, then stopping. Silence stretched thick in the air. I backed into the kitchen, clutching the flashlight Daniel had left behind. My whole body was trembling. Then, from the other side of the apartment, a voice. Low, rasping, the same one from the videos. I told him he couldn't hide. The blood in my veins turned to ice. I swung the flashlight toward the sound, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Nothing. Just shadows stretching across the walls. Then, from the window again, 3 harder knocks. This time followed by a scrape, like nails dragging across the glass. I couldn't take it anymore. I bolted toward the stairwell, phone still clutched in my hand. As I threw open the door to the hallway, I glanced back one last time, and saw it. For just a fraction of a second, framed in the sliver of my window as the blinds shifted, was a figure. Tall, thin, head tilted unnaturally to the side, its face hidden, swallowed in darkness. I didn't wait. I ran down the stairs 2 at a time, burst out of the building and didn't stop until I reached the street where flashing red and blue lights finally appeared. The police searched my apartment. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints outside the window, nothing to explain the knocks, the voice, the figure I swore I saw. When I showed them the videos from Daniel's phone, they exchanged looks but said very little. One of them, older, more serious, pulled me aside. He lowered his voice. "You need to stay with someone else for a while. Don't go back there alone." It was the same thing the officer had told Daniel, according to the story he'd shared with me. I moved out the next morning, staying with family across town. I never saw Daniel again. His case went cold, just another missing person with no clear answers. His apartment was cleared out eventually, rented to someone new. But sometimes, I remember his last words to me outside that cafe, whispered with such quiet desperation. "Just keep an eye on me, okay?" You'll see what I mean. Soon I did see. And now I live every day knowing that whatever took Daniel hasn't forgotten about me either.